Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Hi everyone and welcome to On the House, the Household Management Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Gabriella Yastra, coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's begin.
Welcome back to On the House, the Household Management Science Insights podcast. Climate change is a massive threat to the future of our planet. As global temperature records are being continually broken, vast regions are on the verge of becoming deserts, and coastal cities are suffering brutal infrastructure destruction from extreme flooding. And all of this is happening all at once. And so while it's important to incorporate climate change mitigation practices into your life, it's equally important and time sensitive to start adapting. And to guide us through this episode is Ranjan Datta, Communities Disaster Research Chair at Indigenous Studies at the Department of Humanities at Mount Royal University, Calgary, Canada. Hi Ranjan, it's lovely having you on the show. How are you going today?
It's going well. Thank you so much having this opportunity. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you here. But before we begin, could you tell us about the climate crisis adaptation strategies currently being practiced around the world and how community gardening comes into play?
I born and raised in a country which is very under climate threat. It is Bangladesh. So in my lifetime, I have seen when I was child, 10 to 12 years old, when we had 31 or 32 degree, we used to feel so hot. And I last year went to Bangladesh for my field research. The temperature was 42 to 47. So within my 30 to 40 years lifetime, I have seen the temperature is almost more than 10 to 15 degree. So this temperature is creating lots of health crisis to the people, mental crisis to the people, food crisis, because the food pattern that we used to have, traditional food, is no more growing. The many insects are no more visible. Many traditional plants are no more. People cannot have those. So these are the many visual impact that we can see. There are many invisible impact. For example, for it creating many domestic violence, it creating many displacement because the people used to grow the food, they cannot grow the food, they have to go to the other cities. So it's creating forced migration from within the country, within the community. It's also forcing the losing the language and sustainability. Because once people are moving, they cannot take their language to the other places. They have to learn new languages, new ways of adaptation. And they also lost the sustainability they have been living for thousands of years. Because when their new place growing, they are more dependent on the market food. And the market food morely is monopoly-based cultivation system, because they are no more able to create traditional based food because they are no more connected with the land. So when I came to Canada for my higher education, currently I'm a Canada Research Chair. I have been living 14 years in Canada, working with very indigenous community here. Indigenous community in Canada, they have been talking a lot of issues, the many land-based community or minority communities in Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. The similar story, I can see that the people are talking about. They have less fish nowadays, less drinking water, and less native plant. Of course, ongoing colonization impact is still there. It's also in Bangladesh because land-based knowledge and practice in climate policy, climate decision making are not included. So when we are talking about climate change, it doesn't happen automatically. Humans are the most responsible. They are creating the climate crisis. That's why we need to introduce how human is creating climate crisis. So that's why we need to say it so that we as a human become responsible on it. And when we are talking about community-based gardening, it's time to reclaim bringing that land-based practice that has been forcefully taken away. And now the climate crisis is happening, extreme heat wave is happening. Even last 2 weeks in Bangladesh, it was 48 degrees Celsius, is which is more than whatever the historical record in Bangladesh within 200 years. So those kind of extreme event is happening more frequently now. In fact, in Canada, the land I'm standing on is Treaty 7 territories, Calgary, Alberta, is the west part of the Canada. Last 3 years, amount of forest fire is happening. The people didn't see within 100 years of the colonial history that they kept the record. And also the, the less rain and less water and even less snow because summer comes 1 month early and goes 1 month late, and that we do not have enough snow to cover 2 extra months of the drinking water source.
Yeah.
As you can see, it's not only global south or global north, it's happening everywhere. And when we are talking about 1 degree or 1.5 degree, actually in real life it's happening more than that.
For sure. I remember as a kid as well, when I was growing up in Singapore, what was considered hot was anything above 30 degrees because it was pretty normal for it to be in the high 20s. But now it's almost a miracle if it's in the high 20s, and it's very normal for it to be 33 degrees to 36 degrees. And I'm not that old, so for me to be able to experience this or witness this within my lifetime is quite alarming. But thank you for sharing that with us. That's a great preface for our topic for today. I believe that it serves as very good evidence for why we should be looking at climate crisis adaptations. But before we get further into detail, we'd like to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Ranjan? And my first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time when you're not researching?
When I was back home, I used to go for playing in my childhood, going for fishing. Now I have really hard time to get free time as a researcher. I feel like I'm 22 hours busy my whole day, only 2 hours get time. However, I try to make time mm, to not only to enjoy time only myself. I want but also I would like to feel what is my responsibility that what is happening. So I go for fishing. I go do community gardening. When I go for fishing or community gardening or land work, I just don't do it just like other people go for outside for enjoyment. I have a political intention in it. The political intention is I take my children for my fishing and I tell my story. How we used to have the sustainable fishing source and why it is no more. When I do gardening, I tell my story. At the same time, I also take my children to the indigenous elder and knowledge keeper. What they tell, that what happened to this land, what was before, and what is happening. How the colonial history of ongoing colonization damaged their sustainable land-based practice, and why the food crisis has been created. and how the many people become dependent on the market food, whereas we don't know where the food is coming from. Once we don't know where the food is coming from, the food story, we do not become responsible to the food. Once we are not responsible to the food, we are not responsible to ourselves, and we are not responsible what is going with our surrounding.
Yeah.
So um, in 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 my time, I try to invest in a way. Of course, is mental healing for me, because I have what I have seen in my lifetime is a trauma. Every time, as an immigrant person, as a settler of color, I don't have any opportunity to going and buying organic food from the farmers market because I don't have that ability. I remember when I came to Canada as an immigrant, the one tomato was more than $1, and I didn't have that much money, and still I don't have. So we we went to the shopping market and always look for the cheaper food, canned food that can, at least we can survive too. But once we started the community garden, it gave us the 6 months organic food support that we are connected, that we are creating, and we are becoming responsible. So those kind of work or spare time help me to rediscover, to decolonize who I am and who I need to be as a scholar, as a community member, as an immigrant.
That's really inspiring, and it's such a good, fulfilling way to spend your time as well. So, aside from your community gardening practices, is there a favorite activity that you enjoy doing with your kids?
Of course, as I said, I go for fishing, I go for land walk with the indigenous elder knowledge keepers. And I sometimes go only just land walk with our children and give them their solo time and tell them, okay, do whatever you would like to do. And once they're coming back, and I ask them what you did, and they explain we played in the within that land, plant, insect, anything, and the many things, because they are part with us. They should have the same kind of rights that we think we should have. So we should co-live in our colonial history, colonial way education. What we have learned that human is the best creation. That is the main problem in our education system. That only human can decide for the non-human. But if you look at the indigenous history or land-based practice, everything belongs to the circle. So once we go to the nature, we become part of it. We become more responsible to each other.
Mhm.
And I think gardening is one part, then fishing, and also weeding, telling stories, taking photographs, walking in the mountains. Those all those two ways are so important. These are the couple of examples from my life. Maybe other people have many other ways.
Mhm. It sounds like you have very strong core values, which is certainly admirable. Now, is there anyone in your lifetime that you've really looked up to that you'd say you take inspiration from and really admire throughout your life?
Well, in my life, I need always need to go back in my childhood. When I'm childhood, I'm talking about childhood. I'm talking until my undergraduate and graduate. So in my whole life, I got colonial education. Colonial education, in a sense, that land-based education, land-based activities, learning decolonization is not important. So when I was learning all the education and working with the communities, and even with my mom one day told me, I told you many stories and you are giving me numbers. What I'm going to do with the numbers? Where are my stories? So those kind of challenges I was not happy with my work at all because I was not able to speak about my pain. I was not able to speak what is my pain, what I want to do. Because by the name of science, we wanted to be always neutral, in a way, objectivity that we cannot talk about our feelings. Otherwise, we will be biased. But it was not the main basis of the science at all. But we colonized it in a way that people can control it. So I didn't get the proper education in my whole life until I had the opportunity to meet with indigenous elder, knowledge keeper, educator in North America. So in that education, I learned how to build my relationship with the moon. How moon is my relative. It took me long time to deconstruct my education, my thought, the way I see, the way I feel. So before my education, I had to get my degree, I had to get my education, I had to get the job. That was the main pressure in my on me to achieve everything. When I had the opportunity to get indigenous elder, knowledge keeper, and education and land-based education, my education, it didn't remain as education, it became celebration because I enjoy each moment to opportunity to transform who I am. I enjoy each opportunity that yes, I have the opportunity to learn. For example, I'm sharing the story today with you. It's also encouraging me that I have someone, that someone is listening. When we are listening to each other, we are becoming responsible to each other and we are building solidarity. So the inspiration is decolonial education system that we are learning. We are learner for each moment, each time.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear that you've managed to turn your passions into education for other people and into tangible research. It's always such a gratifying experience, I must imagine. Now, I feel like we got to know a bit better about you and hear a bit about your life. So that's great. But we'll move on to the interview section now. And the first question I want to ask is, what is the importance of rethinking climate crisis adaptations, especially for individual households?
Rethinking climate change, I always call climate crisis because we are creating climate crisis. Climate change doesn't happen automatically. For my personal research, education, and community activities, what I have learned, it has to start from myself, from understanding. When I'm saying myself, it's not about physical who I am, about my worldview. How do I understand who I am? Which land I am standing on? How this land has been forcefully changed from the way to us and for whose need? And how I am participating in the colonial system that has been creating many extreme climate crises. So once I ask this question, this is the first question I ask. And if I have answer from my education, it's great. If I don't have answer, I go to the community, indigenous particularly, elder knowledge keeper, to learn their stories so that I can enrich, I can create belongingness with the story, what is going on, so that I'm not participating what is going on. I can challenge it, I can change it. So climate crisis, that what is happening today, we can see wherever, which doesn't matter which land we are standing on. We can see every land, how we created for the human needs, many ecocide. And we destroy all the non-human for the human need. And continuously using high toxic fertilizer for monopoly food consumption, profit making process, because we want to accumulate profit. And only 2% or 3% people exploit holding more than 80% resources in the world. So, what is the main problem of the climate crisis or climate change? If we look at, I think it's human greediness. And by the name of colonial education system, colonial system of civilization, we are participating on it. Once we understand this colonial paradigm, colonial worldview, we become responsible to challenge that paradigm.
And so you mentioned about going to the elder knowledge keeper, the indigenous elder knowledge keeper, to learn about to get a better understanding of what's going on and to challenge it. Is this something that's applicable to everyone around the world? How would you recommend going about that? Is this something that's searchable online? I just imagine that most people don't have a very good understanding of how to do this.
Um, Currently, I'm living in indigenous land. The colonial history is not too old, and still ongoing colonization is going on in this land. And indigenous people still have very sustainable knowledge system. And for me, it was the scientific source of learning how the sustainable land has been destroyed and still going on. So for me, it was very, I would say, very empathetic and also delighting way to learn indigenous history from indigenous elder knowledge keeper. In the same thing also for Bangladesh, even maybe many parts of the world. In many parts of the world, sometimes people say we don't have indigenous people. In some context, we are all indigenous people. If we talk with our elders, knowledge keepers within our family, within our community, we'll find lots of sustainable stories that today's generation we don't know. And from that generation, if we do not collect or learn these sustainable stories from our own elder and knowledge keeper, we are going to lose. Our future generation is going to lose. So I would say starting with own community, own family, within own community member would be the first steps. And if we are in indigenous land, and if we have access with the indigenous elder knowledge keeper or indigenous courses, the students or free indigenous online resources from the land we are, I think it's many resources are available. And first thing we need to understand that's indigenous knowledge. When I'm saying indigenous, it's land-based I'm referring land-based sustainable knowledge for thousands of years. We need to understand the indigenous land-based knowledge doesn't need validation from the Western science because already it's valid, it's already proved. We have to understand it. I'm not talking about some kind of magical thing. I'm talking about scientific based information that has been sustainable. If you look at the Canada or Canada, if we exclude just 300 years of colonization, and we will see the millions years of sustainability. So isn't it the science? If we don't understand it is science, then we don't understand the meaning of science.
Yeah.
I think it's if first is our willingness and rethink our education system.
Yeah, I think that that's a connection that a lot of people don't tend to naturally draw themselves, asking their elders, people in the community who have been around for a long time, what the history is about. And even if they aren't necessarily well informed about the climate crisis itself, learning about how things were back in their day, you could draw your own connections from there. So it's something that we don't really do it doesn't come naturally to all of us. But with community gardening itself, you did mention previously that when you started during the community gardening practice, you had 6 months of food to live off. Could you share a bit more about that and what the key benefits and positive effects are of starting that community gardening? How big did you make it? How many people involved? And how can people integrate this into their own community?
Well, we when we came to Canada when I was studying my PhD, we were not able to afford the organic food, and for our kind of the food need, the community garden concept that came up. So we started with only 3 or 4 family members from 2 to 3 countries, 10 community plots. In 2019, just before COVID, it became 120 plots, 20 different countries, and 500 adults, more than 200 children and youth. And idea was not only growing the food at that time, because idea was building the community. What does the community mean? Community mean to understand each other, learning each other culture, and learning from the indigenous elder knowledge keepers. Children were dancing in the community garden. They grew the food from the beginning to the end, and they play with this the community garden. They make a science project and they showcase the science project to the school. And we also kind of building network about job information within the community garden, and talking about our own ways of doing community garden. So it became intergenerational learning, and also transnational learning space, community building space, self-determination space. That's why we call it food sovereignty. That means umbrella of sovereignty. Is one food security is one, only one entity, but main was many. Children learning, science learning, uh, community building activities, arts activities, um, knowing the native lands, colonial history of the land, reclaiming the relationship with the animal, plant, insect. So many benefits that we have seen within last 8 years, and it became within last years from 10 to 120 plots, and became one of the model community garden in the city of Saskatoon. In our community garden, we kept 3 or 4 plots for the open, so people just grow it and share with the community people, and also within the food bank. Those who don't have space to community garden, they can come and grow, and we also share with the people those who need food, and people those who need food, they can take food from there. So it was not only intention to the growing food and eat. So many places I have seen, the community garden has a misconception. They grow their own food, and they do not share. It's not intention of the community garden. Community garden is main intention is, while we are growing our own food, building at the same time the community solidarity.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many benefits that arise from community gardening, and as a kid, I think what would have excited me the most is being able to learn from it, something that's being practiced within the community. I recall as a child, used to be really, really just bewildered by these plant kit things that you grow on your own, because I didn't really have a garden that I could tend to myself at home. Um, and I would get so excited about growing my own mini garden. But the thing about the community garden is that it provides an opportunity for kids to learn in a very practical, hands on scenario, rather than from a plastic plant kit that's basically just consumerism and capitalism at its finest, they can learn in a real world setting. And I feel like that's the best way to learn as well. So the benefits to this are more than two-dimensional, more than three-dimensional. It benefits various people in various ways, which is incredible to learn about. Now, I'm also wondering, how widespread does this community gardening need to be in order for it to make a substantial impact on the climate?
Well, in our community garden, when we are growing food, um, if- first of all, don't need to go to the shop, right? First benefit, we don't need to track, because since we are living in the paddy land, is everything is so far. The first benefit that we are not putting carbon on the transportation. Second, is packaging is making lots of climate issues, right? Plastic and everything. We are not using that one, right? So, and we are eating vegetables. Childrens are they are growing their own food. So, and these food are not coming from somewhere that we don't know. And most of the food in Canada coming from either from USA or Mexico, 5,000-6,000 kilometers away, coming from the big truck or anything. And so also in community garden, we are not using the toxic fertilizer that has been damaging the land or the soil quality. So it has creating many impact on in response to the climate action.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. And it also does, when you take into account the various other benefits that community gardening has. And you look at the climate crisis, because to be honest, sometimes it can wear you out a little bit, seeing how it changes so drastically every single year and it keeps going on. Um, looking at community gardening as more of something that benefits the community itself rather than something that plays a drastic role in the climate crisis, definitely would help to alleviate some of that wariness, I believe. Now, does the effectiveness of community gardening vary depending on where you live or how big or small it might be? Other regions wherein community gardening may not necessarily be as effective compared to other climate crisis adaptation strategies.
For me, I think it is always challenging to start. Beginning is always difficult. Um, when I was in Norway, I didn't know how to grow community garden because at that time I didn't have proper education opportunity at that time. Even when the place I was in US, I didn't get the opportunity as well. But when I got the education, anti-racist education, decolonial education, at the same time got the opportunity. Yes, I need to build my relationship with the land, right? So it became combined together. But starting was so difficult because at the beginning we started because for the need that we don't have any food at our whole house. And the place was name was Saskatchewan. It's very well known for the soil quality of soil. Then we decided why not we can use this opportunity. So even though we had intention to grow community garden, but it didn't get the opportunity or didn't enforce to create it. It doesn't mean that we didn't do community garden in our whole life. In my back home, in our land-based community in Bangladesh, when I'm saying it's land-based, it's only 4% people they are still practicing land-based. 95% people they are not land-based. So I grew up in land-based practice, community garden, community-oriented initiative, but I didn't get this opportunity. to learn why the community-based practice or traditional land-based practice is important in our education system. So I didn't learn those importance. That is the first challenge, I would say, that why I didn't give the importance. It's not about me, it's about structure. Structure in a sense in education system, I didn't learn this. That's why I always wanted to push back. No, maybe I don't need to do it. These are not important things I need to do. I need to do something else. So that is the, I would say, in many still in education system is the challenge that we do not see the value of traditional land-based practice, community garden education system. It's not about going outdoor and doing something, about understanding the land relationship. So that's why I would say I didn't enforce me to do it, because my education system um, didn't force me to do it. But when I got this education, relearning that I used to do it in my childhood, I got reconnected. Then right away I started. So I would say it's not that people they don't want to do it because they don't have education, they don't have learning opportunity. Yes, that is the important thing that everybody should do. So education should come from the very childhood, so that people can learn automatically. Yes, it should be in our everyday practice. Otherwise, it doesn't matter which land or wherever we are living, we wouldn't feel that is important. We need to do it.
Mhm. I also feel like a lot of us who do live on colonized lands receive history education from the colonizer's perspective. So we don't often learn so much about the land itself. But for those people who are interested in learning more and also about starting a community garden practice, what are some entry level plants that will be easy to achieve and to start out with, for those who don't necessarily have the in depth knowledge of gardening or the lands?
So before I can share the perspective that what I have learning from my own research. Before, if people wants if people they don't do community garden, if they want to do right way the community garden, they may not have in-depth learning. But if they start to go community garden first, talking with the people, what are the benefit and how is going to help, studying the learning this process and the beneficial. Of course, there are of course the challenges, but over time challenges become kind of transfer as an opportunity as well. So I would recommend people to go and look and learn the positive aspect and see how they can become part of that ongoing community garden instead of everything starting as a new, so that they become part of the community, so they don't need to know everything. Or maybe if they have willingness, the community will teach them how to be part of the community. So that is the another benefit of the doing community gardening. So we are not by yourself, we are part of the collective.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it too. And would you recommend considering maximizing the impact and scaling community gardening initiatives up, maybe expanding the community garden at all? Will this play a big will this have a big effect on um on on the climate at all, or on the community? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say the people, those who are going for the community garden, they should all write their story and share with whatever ways possible. If it is Facebook, if it is a LinkedIn or other social media, to talk about it. Because we spend a lot of time talking many other things. So this should be our everyday conversation as well with our friends, with our professional network, within our other network, within the family, of course, from the from our family, community, and other network, so that we we are not thinking, oh, this is something that we do occasionally. It should be the everyday practice. And once we can create this culture within ourselves, it may take long time, but that is the great way to deconstruct all the colonial or monoculture or other thing that is creating climate impact. So conversation is first, sharing stories is of course the another one, and also draw it, write it. Academic writing, storytelling, or a blog, any taking photos to talk about so many ways people can do it.
Mhm. Yeah, and it will only inspire one person at a time, which is really all you need to spread all of what do you call it, that motivation, that gratification, that the aspiration to start community gardening. But for those people who don't have a community garden that's nearby them, and it's pretty out of the way, we live in a pretty fast and go society sometimes, and people might not necessarily have the means to stop by a community garden all the time. Would gardening at home suffice, or even remotely achieve what community gardening does, just even a little bit?
I would say even community is not outside of the family.
Mhm,
Family is a community as well,
mhm,
right? So once we start the planting this within our house, the each plant also become the part of the community.
mhm,
So it all depends how we see the community. So community can start within house. They try to do as much as possible. We live in many challenging world, many challenging challenges are within ourselves. So don't let stop our existing challenge.
mhm,
So need to make possibility whatever way, thinking it, and also encouraging others, my next door neighbor, they're talking about what plant they're talking about. So in a way, even though we are living in the urban cosmic city, still we can build a community. Not necessarily every plant has to be in together,
mhm.
but all people has to be together to common understanding.
Right. I really love that answer so much, and it brings me a lot of relief, because I started trying to garden. Not, I'd say that gardening is quite a stretch for what I've started doing, but I started regrowing my spring onions, and I've gotten so much gratification out of it, even for just a week, because there's so much growing that happens, and I got so inspired to start doing more. But I was wondering through this episode, like, oh, should I be going to a community garden? Because I know where it is, but it's quite a while away from me, and it's going to be real, like, pretty inconvenient to get to all the time. So that's such a relief for me to hear. To be honest, I'm being pretty selfish right now in asking this question. Now, before we end up the interview, I want to ask you a last question, and that is, what do you see or hope to see in the future of community gardening and the climate crisis adaptations?
Each initiative, even today's conversation, is the one step of climate action. If climate crisis has been created 300 years, it may take 400 years to, minimize it or maybe going back. So we have to shouldn't think so big that we cannot do it. But if we can see um, small initiative is making me happy, why not we start about it, talking about it? So that is the one part. And the same, another part is being part of the indigenous land and water protection solidarity, because protecting land and water is not only for indigenous people, it's all of ours, responsibility. Because if our water get contaminated, or if we don't have drinking water, don't have the land for non-human, who is going to suffer? All of us. So being part of the indigenous land and water, land back movement, and decolonization starting from ourselves, and as a community, building the community, and also enforcing the political, local political, national political, and international political to take the action of the climate action or the climate crisis, and also supporting my surrounding for youth, cross-cultural immigrant, and indigenous initiative, whatever way we can do it. So there are many ways, but we need to start from somewhere. And also conversation is the very critical aspect. If we don't have conversation, we don't have opportunity to learn, and we don't have opportunity to inspire ourselves. So conversation is so critical.
I totally agree with that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like I learned so much more, and I came into this not expecting to learn so much about the history of the land and how that's really important, but I learned um, just an exceptional amount of detail about it. So I really, really appreciate it. It's really got me thinking about the land that I'm standing on as well, which is suddenly something that doesn't cross my mind every day, but it certainly will now more often. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us, and I hope our audience takes that away as well with them. So we're moving on to the practices and habits section now. This is where we ask you about the everyday application of what you've just shared with us. And the first question I have for you is, what is a habit you recommend doing to manage the community gardening practices?
Well, for when we are thinking for habit, we need to see the benefit of the growing our own food. When I'm saying the benefit, that means how the growing food is creating lots of benefits, right? And also knowing that the, how monopoly farming industry's food is negative for is if it is meat, if it is fish, if it is any forms of vegetable, to understanding it. So understanding and having the conversation, everyday conversation, is a difficult habit. Difficult to bring it as a everyday habit. I think it's having this conversation starting with the family, I think is a good habit to within the talking. Even going land walk, for example, going outside. When we are going outside, to understanding which plant is important, which plant is maybe is important for our health. For example, the land we have a rose flower, and we can make lots of tree, beneficial tree with this, right? And we in the surrounding, every plant, native plant has benefits for everyday life. To knowing this is also important to understanding everyday habit, to become use those the plant in everyday life. So I think everyday habit is start from that, having the conversation, building the community, similar minded community, talking with each other, and learning similar work activities, or event what is going on in the city or surrounding is so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the way you think about it with bringing it into the conversation with family and talking about the negative effects of monopoly farming. And it's such a small but impactful way to spread this this practice, I guess. Are there any challenges though when doing this practice? I know you mentioned that one of the biggest challenges is also even just starting to bring this into conversations. But are there any times where you have found people disagreeing with you? How do you manage all of that? What are some ways to to prepare yourself for all of these questions and to kind of, I wouldn't say defend, I wasn't I wouldn't say to go so fast to defend it, but if you think about it, it's kind of like, what do we need to know to prepare ourselves for these questions?
Uh, we, as I explained, we are living in colonial surrounding. Everything, our education, our food, our living style, everyday habits, right? And it's not possible to change everything at a time. So, as I said, we don't need to feel guilty about it. What, even though we are eating, farmless food, farm-based food or market-based food, or using our own personal transportation, we do not need to feel the guilt because we don't have other option at this. But whatever is possible, I would say, start from there. Because if we feel guilt, it's not going to change anything right away. But our willingness, once we start taking the responsibility, yes, this is my responsibility, we need to do it, then the change is going to happen. Even though it's small change. Though, if I start something today, maybe after 5 years, I will see many changes. Still, I am living also in the colonial pattern. I was not able to change everything. So, it's all about um, taking the responsibility, understanding that we are also responsible, taking small action at a time, building the community. Even though I can do it, but I'm learning how other people do it. Even though I don't have ability to do what other people are doing, but I'm learning. I'm sharing with my other friend how they can do it.
Yeah.
So it's not about we need to do it at the right way, but starting from somewhere so that we can see that is happening every parts from everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also is far more than just contributing to climate crisis adaptations. It's also being the moral support for your community in this time, which I guess does tie into climate crisis adaptation because everyone's attempting to adapt to the climate crisis together. So that's a great way of looking at it. Thank you for sharing that with us. I definitely learned so much from you. Now we're going on to the open mic section, and this is your opportunity to talk about anything you're passionate about that doesn't have to be related to the topic. Now, I know, Ranjan, that you're really passionate about community gardening. So if you want to continue talking about that and leave our listeners with a few last words of wisdom, we're happy for you to do that. But otherwise, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
I would say every opportunity, every moment is an opportunity. It's a celebration. So use every opportunity as a light to change who we are and who we need to be. And that makes us that we can do it. And I'm hopeful that we really can do it.
You are so positive, and this is rubbing off on me. Like, just talking to you today about community gardening has set me in such a good mood for the rest of the day. And I am very optimistic about building my own little community garden and sharing it with my friends now, even if it's just my little spring onion that grew really quickly in a few days. But even that is sharing with the community. It's a little bit of gardening, and that's really all you need for it to be community gardening, from what I've learned from you. So thank you so much, Ranjan, for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it. If our listeners can find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
They can Google me with my name. My name is Ranjan Datta, Ranjandatta, mostly community-based researcher. So they can find me in LinkedIn. They can find me in ResearchGate and also Google Scholar. So they will
Amazing.
find all my community-based work, decolonizing work, activist work that I have been doing last 17 years.
Amazing. We'll link this in the show notes. If you're from Canada, you probably would find that extremely helpful in your community gardening practices as well. Now, thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope that you learned as much as I did. We'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to On the House, produced by the Household Management Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes like this from across 10 life management perspectives can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your smart devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at hm.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Gabriella Yastra. Thanks for tuning in.